Good morning, everyone, and welcome. We're going to start. I'll admit people as we go along. So on this call day, we're at least getting together and listening to an expert. Just some housekeeping rules. Just switch off your videos if you can. You'll see it on the right-hand side corner of your profile. There's 3 dots. Just click those dots and say stop video. Please also mute your audio so we can all hear Jacky. So Jacky, thank you so much for agreeing to host this webinar for us. We appreciate your time. Jacky's going to talk about the intelligence and risk-based approach to investigations. But she knows more about this than I do, so without any further ado, Jacky, over to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chris, and to everybody that's still awaiting their parole decisions, welcome to Block C. The topic that I'm talking about this morning is one that is firstly very close to my heart, but also based on years that I worked as a prosecutor, where I did consulting and also where I headed up a forensic investigation unit and looked after information security. And for most people, the concept of intelligence is a bit of a foreign one, and then you couple it with risk and you say, how in the world can this be an approach to investigations? But as you'll see during the presentation, it's more than just an approach to investigation. It goes right to the top of our organizations, whether this be within the private sector or whether this be for government. Firstly, we need to get our managers and our exec and our boards on board when it comes to an approach to effectively address crime, not only within the South African context and also within an international context. Now, most of you would know some of my presentations. I actually speak about a little more than cyber, but a lot of the lessons that I learned that I'm going to share with you today originates especially from what I learned during investigations where there was an element of cybercrime. So some of the discussion points, firstly, we're going to talk about intelligence and risk and how we can use those two concepts within one sentence, and then to look at what intelligence is, because one of the things I realized is that we have a bit of a misunderstanding of what intelligence is. So we're going to look at the pyramid that builds up to the top and then look at what the term intelligence means, not only for the books, but also for us within our organization. And then, of course, what is the value of intelligence within that specific investigation environment? Then the concept of intelligence-guided investigations. Now, some of you might be familiar with the concept of intelligence-led policing, which we will talk a little bit about it. And then we'll also talk about how the concept of intelligence-guided investigations came about. And then what is a risk-based approach mean for your organization, and more specifically for the way that you deal with investigation. We will refer to a few common success factors, and then lastly, how do I incorporate this type of approach into my investigation units, and of course, how do I filter it through to the investigations that I deal with on a daily basis. So firstly, the question is, should we use intelligence and risk in one sentence? For most people, the risk is to assume that everybody has intelligence, but for purposes of this presentation, let us assume that we're dealing with intelligent people that want to make intelligent choices for the investigation and for their specific work environment. And you'll see throughout the presentation that actually these two terms, although they are very separate and used mostly in separate instances, they are equal. And if you put them together, they actually form a winning recipe when we deal with the work that we do within our forensic and investigation units. Now, strategy is something that's not always used in the same sentence as investigations, and especially not governance frameworks that actually supersede strategy. But what I'm going to show you today is the value of actually, firstly, for your unit, having a good governance framework, a forensic governance framework, and from there to build on your strategy, and that strategy should be informed by intelligence. And then that your strategy should be actually to manage risk, not investigations, because an investigation is actually the result, or you deal with the result of something that had gone wrong, somebody that has broken our control, somebody that has hit the organization, a threat that has realized, a vulnerability that's been exposed, and we're dealing with the consequence of that. And one of the things that we do to deal with the consequence of such actions is to investigate. But it might be that if we implement a risk-based approach, we don't always just conduct forensic investigations. We might decide to do a preliminary investigation. We might decide to just beef up on the controls that govern that specific area, or we can decide just to disrupt those actions. The whole thing about an intelligence and risk-based approach is to increase our proactive efforts and to produce more efficient investigations. And under efficient, one of the things that I always stress is the time we have to spend on investigations, because if we are proactive, what do? We have to play less of a catch-up game, because we already, to some extent, anticipated that an event like this could occur. Biggest risk, however, is, as I said, that people do not understand the concept of intelligence and how we get to the process or to the product that we can actually call an intelligence report or an intelligence product. Secondly, we cannot effectively do what we didn't plan for. And later on in the presentation, when we deal with how to incorporate this in investigations, you'll see the value of this. For those of you that have decided in the beginning that you're going to deal with a certain investigation rather in a disruptive fashion, to disrupt the crime network, to just disrupt the action and move on, you will be able to share my pains in that you really can come back from a disruptive action to something that you can take to a court of law, because your approach to something is different. And by this, I'm not saying that if you plan for something, you should be rigid in your approach, but you should actually have a good idea of what you want to achieve right from the start. And this is where your strategy and your operational plan and your investigation plan comes into play. Now, the famous pyramid. So firstly, if we, for a great number of years, I realized that even I confuse data, at least information, with intelligence. Because intelligence, we always think it's what the man in the street whispers in my ear, and it's not really something that I've applied my mind to, that I did some work on, and so forth. And actually, it's quite the opposite, as we see from this pyramid. Firstly, data is my raw and uninterpreted observations, like a crime report. Now, to give you an example, say, for example, we have a crime report around Woodland Shopping Centre in Pretoria, and please, this is a hypothetical situation. We see from that crime report that there's an increase in informal settlements arising around the shopping centre. There's instances of people saying that their purses have been snatched, their windows have been smashed. But we see that there's a rise in the area in terms of potential crime points. Now, let's move from that data to the level of information. This is data put in context and empowered with meaning, which gives it greater relevance and purpose. Now we go and we drill down in that increase in informal people, people that move freely through that area, people that walk around at night, and we see this could be a recipe for additional disasters. What is knowledge? This is information that has been given an interpretation and understanding. When a person has added his or her wisdom, it becomes knowledge. Now, what does that wisdom mean? It doesn't always just come with the gray hairs, and please, people, it's locked down if the gray hairs stick out. But knowledge is where I go and I take the crime report, I take it, I put it in context, I take my personal experience, my team's experience, I interpret the data, and I bring it to a bigger understanding. Then we've only moved to the level of knowledge. Now, when we get to intelligence, this is data, information, and knowledge that has been evaluated, analyzed, and presented in a decision-making format for action-orientated purposes. So based on everything that I've done, I've seen, you know what, I need to move more security people there. I need to contact the municipality to assist me with the flow of people. Maybe those people must be relocated, but I can present a document or a product that can inform decision. And what is very important is that that intelligence product is only classified as intelligence if it provides a relevant and actionability assessment of probabilities. In layman's terms, that says, is it relevant to my specific area of work? Say, for example, I'm in the police force, or I'm the security company that is tasked to protect that specific environment. So is it relevant? Yes, it definitely is. Is it actionable? Yes. And did I assess the probabilities? So based on all the things that I've put together, I can see that here it might be necessary for me to deploy additional manpower just to manage the situation a bit better, and rather to be preventative than to be reactive, because there's a real threat that I need to action. I need to mitigate the risk to an acceptable level. And the three components must collectively be true to be considered as intelligence. So this specific graph did a lot for me in terms of my personal learning to get me to the point that I realized that I have to do something with all the data and the information that I have available, and I have to shape it into something that management can make an informed decision on. And just because it falls without this, outside of the scope of this, remember that this intelligence must then be converted to some or other form of evidence if I want to take this matter to court. And that is, of course, if the intelligence can be converted and if my approach is not just to disrupt, but to eventually conduct a full forensic investigation. Now, what information is available in my organization? And I think here Chris is going to shake in his boots because I won't use the bad words again, but I said in a previous presentation that we gather so much stuff in our companies, but what do we do with it? Classic example. We go and we say to the IT department, please store every single log, IP address, MAC address from here to Timbuktu. But do I actually do with it? And now I want you to keep that pyramid in your mind, because that's not intelligence yet. I haven't done anything with it. I haven't applied my mind. It's data at the most. I haven't gone to the level of information, of knowledge and intelligence. And what do we do if we take that approach that we just keep on gathering? We create something called alarm fatigue. And eventually, if you at least dump all that stuff on an analyst, you create analysis paralysis. Let's take, for example, the scenario of a SOC or a scene. We keep on pushing and saying to people, monitor the alarms, but there's never any action really taken for it besides that maybe the IT department blocks the threat and they move on. But we never go, as our responsibility as investigators, and address the whodunit evidence. Do we identify the wrongdoers behind this, or do we just keep on eliminating the threat knowing to a great extent that what we're going to face is that those people will keep on coming back. What, for example, is best demonstrated with especially cyber offenses is I might close one loophole. The same people will modify their modus operandi and they will keep on coming back. Intelligence products will help me to identify who the people are. Who's my attacker? Who am I dealing with? Why are they doing what they're doing? So if I look at what my sources of intelligence is, firstly, have I actually sat down and looked at what data and maybe information and knowledge I have available in-house? A good example is, what do you do with your case database? Do you actually take all that data from all the cases that you've investigated and put it in a central database? And do you analyze it and make it work for you? Do we look at industry and sector information and convert that into intelligence products that we can use as an industry? Do we actually mine our public-private partnerships? Do we have regular meetings with law enforcement in which we can share information to convert into intelligence products? Because the information that we're talking about is non-competitive. The only people that are going to benefit if we don't share these kind of intelligence reports or sets of information is the criminals, not the salespeople, because the approach might be that this syndicate is going to break into my firm or in my factory tonight. I'm going to put everything in place. I'm not going to tell my neighbor about it in the hope that they're going to break in there. I can tell you now they might do that, but the next day they put measures in and the guys are back at your door. So the only people that are going to benefit, especially when we deal with organized crime syndicates, as we do mostly in South Africa these days, is by sharing our information and converting it to intelligence products that can not only inform our company's heads, but also us as an industry and us as a community of people that want to prevent and to deter the level of crime that we're currently facing in this country. And please don't think that because we're in lockdown, this is not an important time for us, because we've all seen what has happened, especially in the cyber world, in terms of COVID-19 specific types of threats. Now, I was speaking to somebody yesterday about this, and I said to them, nothing's changed. The COVID-19 emails that have been coming through is phishing. We are also used to phishing. We want to sit next to the dam and fish or next to the sea, but the cyber criminals are keeping us quite busy with the phishing. The only thing that they've done is they've given it a COVID-19 flavor. And here, if we don't share intelligence, we're not going to know that, for example, what have they been doing with their fake RFQs that they've been flooding most of us with? They've now given it a flavor to now ask for health products, to ask for things that are on the essential goods list, because they know that people, based on human reaction, would be more amenable to react to that because they're desperate. I was dealing with a case now this last week past, where this specific company, their original business is not one of manufacturing face masks and bringing in hand sanitizer, but they're so desperate for business that they thought, let me mine my contacts and see what I can do and get people together so that I can deliver these kind of products. And guess what? It was a scam. And they've departed with quite a lot of money because they had to pay some deposits and they had already started purchasing some materials needed for these products, so they're out of pocket in that too. Now, intelligence-led policing. As you can see from the slides, this is a very structured definition, but basically what we're dealing with here is firstly a management framework. And it says that intelligence is the foundation for my priorities, for my strategy, for my operational objectives. And it is all about the prevention and suppression of crime. You see, we go back here to the proactive approach. So intelligence-led policing, even in its form as it was, is still all about being proactive and making the informed decisions based on the intelligence reports that are fed into the cycle. And it's also about how I deploy my human resources. How do I allocate my material? What do I do with my technical resources? Because most of the time, these technical resources and human resources are scarce. So let's go back to the example of the Woodlands Shopping Center. Here, we see intelligence-led policing in action because we gathered all the information, we converted it to intelligence, and based on that and a risk-based approach, we decided we're going to deploy additional resources to this area so that we can more effectively mitigate the threat. Relies heavily on the sharing of intelligence and information, not only converting it to something you can use, but sharing it. Now, where the concept of intelligence-guided versus intelligence-led originated is, I think he's now Prof. Dievenage, otherwise he's still doctor, I'm not sure, but Dr. Beert Dievenage and myself were asked to do a presentation on this topic for the police's cybercrime strategy. And one of the things that we said is what we want to see is a more active role, or at least a bigger sponsorship role being played by the executive, because if we have a stronger buy-in from the executive, now being it your board or whether it being the minister or whether it being the head of police or the head of a security company, we want that executive buy-in. And that's why we said that intelligence should not lead but guide the decision-making relating to criminal threats. And then the executive and management will lead the effort. Now, what that means is that I get the buy-in from my executive. They don't necessarily have to know all the nitty-gritty, the things that I do, but it should be the project that they want to brag about. It should be their baby that they adopt and say, look at the success, you know what, we are ahead of this, we are making informed decisions. And what is also very interesting is that although we might create these intelligence products within a forensic environment or in an analytical environment, these kind of products can very successfully be applied to all different areas of the business. Say, for example, in sales. It could also be a big decision. I'm just thinking back at my days in telcos of where do we put up a base station or not, because that area is very prone to crime. Do we want to take the risk? Or how do we deliver our products, because we know that this is now a crime hotspot? We want to maybe send out our trucks with a little bit of extra security presence. Again, intelligence remains key, and I cannot stress the importance of proper analytics in this proactive approach. Again, as I said, we sit with the data. If we don't do anything with it, we're never going to get to the top of the pyramid. And for getting to the top of that pyramid, one of the biggest components is the analysis. A tip, don't go and take your data and leave it with the analyst. Because if you want a good intelligence product, you follow a multidisciplinary approach. And here I can provide you with examples as long as my forearm to say to you that every discipline contributes something to that product. The law enforcement officer, the analyst, the security officials, the IT guys. Now, why put the security, the physical security and the IT together? Because your security threats, especially when it comes to cyber, is made up of threats against your physical as well as your logical security levels. So take that multidisciplinary approach. And later on in the presentation, I'll also talk about the good concept of garbage in, garbage out. You need to believe in your intelligence report. You need to be part of that exercise to develop it and to have faith in what data I put in there, the way it is analyzed, the way it is presented, so that you know once somebody relies on that product, it's actually a credible decision to do so. So what does it mean for us on an operational level? It is all about knowing your attacker. The sales guys have got this right. They've got a whole system of knowing your client. The attacker is our client. If we start understanding what their motive is, what are the resources they have available, what are their capabilities, how is the syndicate, if it is a syndicate, made up? Do they have hierarchies? Do they have runners? Do I want to get to the top guy? Who could the top guy be, or girl? It allows also for a deconstruction of the threat environment and to develop defensive programs to guard against specific criminal threats. If we go back to the Woodlands example, the example can lend itself to a variety of different threats. It could be that people rob persons driving past there, smash and grabs. It can be pickpocketing. It could be a targeted attack by cash and transit heists on the banks in that system, or it can be normal break-ins. So based on the information and intelligence that we've gathered, we can plan accordingly to at least be able to address situations like that in an effective manner. The collections should be rigorous, innovative, proactive, and offensive, not defensive. When we did this presentation at the police on this specific point, they laughed and we said, but it's all about taking the fight to the criminals. Why is it that criminals are not scared to use any tactic to their means, but when we want to address these threats, we sit there with little kid gloves and we get scared about what we're going to do? And please, I'm not saying doing anything illegal, but take definitive action. Gather your intelligence, work your intelligence, and take the fight to the criminals. The last point on this slide about analysis, I need to share an example with you where I, in a budget presentation, asked for some human resources, and the argument that was given back to me is, Jacky, you don't actually need bums on seats. We'll give you lots of systems. And I said to them, it's wonderful. I really need the systems, but please tell me how big a truck you're going to make available so that I can load the server and all the software on the truck when I actually identify a perpetrator, so that this system can go and do the rest of the witness interviews and can actually go and perform the arrests. Why I use that example, people, is there's a lot of focus on artificial intelligence and on systems, but you cannot take the human element away. That application of all the knowledge that you've gathered through the years that you've worked in this profession, the way that you just get that feeling about something, that feeling is worth more than any system in the world. Your experience and your human interaction with data is more important than what most software programs can do. So this graph just gives you an indication of how you actually take an intelligence-guided approach to an investigation. So outer ring, broad scope, which is of course low accuracy. We look at human intelligence, your street cop intelligence, open source data, and we drill down, as you can see from the concentric circles. We monitor, but we don't target as a second step. Then we monitor and we target. Eventually, it can lead to an arrest, and what flows from an arrest in a successful case where you've taken a prosecution-driven approach, I do get an accused. Now look at something. The circle actually doesn't stop there. It goes on right to the point where we deal with a guilty, with a conviction, and with a sentence. But this model, as you can see from Durgeon, Paul, and Sluit, leaves out a very critical step for me, and this is something I addressed in the earlier slides, is after I get that guilty conviction, after I close my case file, what should actually be happening? That information should flow back to the broad scope, low accuracy, because then I create a circle and a flow of information, and I see that I use information and intelligence that I've already mined, and I put it back into the loop, and it's available for me to maybe interrogate when I deal with a syndicate on a later basis. So many times, especially with the cyber things, we look at something and it's a new case and we think, but why does this sound so familiar? And once the investigation has proceeded, you find it's the same role players. Or they just modified their modus operandi, or now the guys that I locked up in the previous case is actually running their syndicates right from the prison. Now, if I take that intelligence that I produced after the case has been closed and I pump it back into that pool and I keep on building my investigation database, I would be able to identify these types of trends more readily. I get asked a question a lot of times, and that is, so Jacky, if we take the intelligence-guided approach, do I forget the old basics of investigation? No, you don't. The basics, and this has been showed through interviews with a number of investigators, both old and new, and they say that you never forget the basics. An intelligence-guided approach supports what you learned as the good old building blocks of how we should investigate crime. Now, what kind of forms of intelligence? We had a look at the previous slide. We're looking at human intelligence. We're looking at what is created by systems. We're looking at open source intelligence. And that means one thing. My old informants, those reports don't become obsolete when we look at an intelligence-guided approach. We take those reports, we work them. We work them against what the data that we have in the company, the data that we have in the industry, the data that we got from sharing tips and tip-offs with our law enforcement partners. Do we have prosecution or litigation-driven investigations? And as much as we all want to put our penguin suits on and take matters to court, what I learned, and this is from 16.5 years of being a prosecutor, is that not all investigations call for court-directed actions. It could be that our best bet here would be to prevent or to disrupt. In instances where I know the crime's going on, nobody is willing to talk, or I need immediate action and I can't wait to get witnesses in the normal fashion. I have agents, I have people that are willing to share intelligence with me, but are too scared to give affidavits. Based on that, I might be taking the decision to rather disrupt and move on than to prosecute. And if you plan this carefully, it might be that if people see that you're successful in that effort, you might have witnesses that later come forward and are now willing to give you affidavits. So when you disrupt, also just bear that in mind and think if you can balance the two, but you wouldn't always be able to disrupt and to prosecute in the same case. It is possible, but you have to plan for it carefully. So how do I solidify a risk-based approach in my organization? We've talked a lot about intelligence now, but what about risk? Firstly, you need to ask yourself the question, do I have a governance framework within my company? Do I have a fraud risk management framework that helps me to guide how I run my business? how I investigate in my unit, all the proactive activities that I do, and how my unit can contribute to the overall strategic objectives of my company. And this will also help you define the tone from the top. Sometimes just putting everything that we do in a document helps people that deal with business decisions the whole time to understand better why they should give us more systems, why we need more resources. So it's not necessarily in what we say, but in how we say it. And the good thing about having a governance framework in place, and from that, of course, flows your strategy, your operational plans, and your risk-based plans, is it becomes a very handy document when you, for example, have to present a report to the Audit and Risk Committee, or whether you have to address the board on certain emerging risks. It also assists us to become more of a trusted business advisor than just the people that they kick out of the basement once something goes wrong. Because if you really stand back and think at the role that forensic people and investigators play, we are asked to be knowledgeable in every single area of a business, because we can't choose what we investigate. Say, for example, something goes wrong in procurement and we don't understand procurement, we can't say that we're not going to investigate it. So who are the best people then to actually advise on emerging risks and on fraud prevention strategies than the people in forensic that are required to have a running knowledge of a whole business operation? What it takes from us is also to have a common understanding of risk management terms. So say, for example, you don't understand, or say, for example, your company has a certain risk tolerance or a risk appetite. That will inform which investigations I'm going to just close, or where I'm going to have a full-blown forensic investigation, going to put all my resources in there, because I know that this is an area that the company has said that we are going to mitigate the risk to a very low residual level of risk, meaning that I have to now look at the situation, the probability, I have to look at the impact if a certain event occurs, and I have to put controls in place and manage those controls so that I bring the risk down, the residual risk, to a level that's acceptable to the company. And although those terms might sound like something that just happens in the sphere of the risk management divisions, or that happens within your audit and risk committee meetings, it is something that you should actually have in place in each and every investigation. Because if you've planned properly and an investigation comes in, you can immediately identify whether the core nature of this is high risk, whether it's medium, or whether it's low risk. And in some of the previous companies that I worked in, the approach that I had was that our unit would only provide regular updates on very high risk cases. Medium to low risk, we would report on a monthly or a quarterly basis. But because we agreed with top management on the specific structure, we were able to immediately get a case in, look at it, see that it is high risk, and know that these are the ones that the executive is going to be interested in regular updates. So, common success factors: cooperation and integration. We've talked about the risk rating and plan of action. What is nice, if the whole company is on the same page, we can agree as a company that based on our risk model, in these instances, we will just disrupt. These ones we'll investigate. And we'll keep an open mind in terms of the investigation, whether we're going to institute prosecution, whether we're going to have a disciplinary, or whether we're going to have a civil action that flows from this type of investigation. It's an effective use of my organization's data and a conversion of that data right up to intelligence products. Also, what this assists you with is the classification of investigation. In some of the previous roles that I had, we sat with a big problem in terms of how do we account for our time? Because we found that a lot of cases that we don't convert to full forensic investigations actually take up a big portion of our time. And how we accounted for that is to say that we actually conduct a preliminary investigation to determine whether there should be a full forensic investigation or whether it's something that we want to pass on to internal audit or maybe to HR and so forth. But of course, there were the matters, the moment it lands on your table, you know, this is a full-blown forensic investigation. And why is this important when it comes to intelligence? It could be that a matter comes in, it's very small, it's the theft of a handset or it's the theft of products from one truck, but now we've got intelligence products in place and we know that syndicates are operating within that area, and the syndicate's modus operandi is to hit a truck and not open it at all because they want to test what the security response is. Now you start seeing that that little incident could be an indication for us that we should do a full forensic investigation. And secondly, that we should increase our security efforts and the mitigating factors that we've put in place to actually address this threat in a more effective way. Risk assessments. Intelligence and risk assessments go together like chocolate and chili. So my fraud risk assessment becomes something that I can actually produce intelligence from, that I can work from, and not just something that the Audit and Risk Committee and the Internal Audit Department requires me to do. Intelligence also assists you in informing on emerging risks. And this is not just stuff that is for your team. Your reports should go straight to the top. Your reports, because you are on the ground, you've got your ear right there, you know, let's take COVID. You know what the current emerging risks in terms of the COVID environment is. What are you doing with that report? Are you converting it into intelligence? Are you producing it to a level of the audit committee or the CEO or the board? Think about that, because this information can be extremely valuable to them, not only in terms of the risk that we face, but maybe an intelligence report that you've done could inform a new way of doing sales and marketing. Early detection and disruption, we've seen this in so many instances. Sometimes, and remember, none of us are immune to threats, but sometimes an intelligence report can help you identify the first instance of the crime, but prevent a magnitude of other incidents happening after it, because you were prepared and ready to deal with this kind of threat. Adequate resources and training. I don't know why, maybe it's just my experience, but people don't realize the value and the need of continuous training within a forensic environment. Intelligence is also going to help you to create that perception of detection that we so need when we take a proactive approach. Just dealing with how you're going to incorporate this, to summarize, it's that command structure for law enforcement, for the people in private sector. It's your executive, it's your board that buys in. Because if they understand what you're dealing with and they see how real these threats are, they're going to be more prone to provide you with the necessary resources in terms of people and processes and systems. We said that the executive is guided by intelligence in its strategy, and the intelligence informs our investigative actions. And under investigative actions, I include both proactive and reactive. It has an organizational-wide application and impact. And it's also important to communicate your plan and approach to the whole organization and to follow up. If you've had successes, put it in a newsletter, communicate it, see that the organization and the board knows that the investment is paying off. There is a return on investment. It has brought success, not only in terms of who we've arrested, but also in terms of what we've prevented. Integrated crime and criminal analysis we've talked about, and the products allow for effective fraud risk assessment and to guide the organization in identifying its main areas of fraud risk. Training. And especially now in this time that we can't get out of our houses, it is a good time to engage on training and to put your time to good use. Remember, garbage in, garbage out. Data must be sufficiently complete, reliable, and available to support quality intelligence products. And it can also influence your decision-making and contribute to efficient investigations that I hope you've seen from what I have presented so far. So not only in terms of prevention, disruption, but also in terms of the reactive investigations, intelligence, and a risk-based approach is really the way to go. And all I can say to you then is take the fight to the criminals. I thank you for the opportunity to share my knowledge with you, and looking forward to supporting you in intelligence solutions for the future.
Sorry, Jacky, thank you. Trying to find the unmute button. Thank you, Jacky, for sharing your insight. Very informative. I enjoyed it so much. Your time experts, people with the necessary expertise are always adding value. So thank you for that, Jacky. Guys, before we leave, there's a poll. Please complete that. It's just 3 questions that we need some feedback from you. We will send you communication on our next webinar. We approached a few people for possible participation. So, but we will communicate that to you during the next few days. Thank you, everybody, and yeah, stay safe. Thank you.